Scene of the Crime Season 1 explores the murders of 2 children and the subsequent investigation. Listener discretion is advised. When we left off at the end of Episode 3, law enforcement had publicly released the still shots of the man on the bridge, whom they termed the main suspect in the case, and the audio of a man's voice directing "down the hill." In this episode, we are going to take an in-depth look at the evidence in this case, the images of the man on the bridge, the audio, and other evidence that we know was found, or we can surmise was deemed useful to police. But first, let's discuss the investigation into the murders of Abby and Libby. Law enforcement officials involved in the case have told us that it was immediately determined that Abby and Libby were the victims of homicide. It appears that the girls were coerced by the suspect to leave the bridge trail, equating to an abduction, before they were murdered in the woods. Dr. Katherine M. Brown, the expert in child abductions and murders we spoke with for this podcast, shed some light on the statistics surrounding child abduction murders for us.
Child abductions, murders are incredibly rare. Child abduction murder is about less than 1/2 of 1% of all homicides in the United States.
To say that the investigation into this unusual case was one of the most comprehensive in the history of the state of Indiana is not an overstatement. Within a week of the discovery of the girls' bodies, 25 investigative agencies on the local, state, and federal level had joined in on the hunt for their killer. Former Carroll County Prosecutor Robert Ives described it as a historic level of police presence in the area. Innumerable investigators from these entities settled in to delve through the evidence, gather information, track down witnesses, and follow up on the thousands of tips that started to come in on the tip lines. Here is Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter speaking with Kelsi for us about the number of officers involved.
We've also reached out to a lot of other agencies in Indiana where we have tips. So just as from the state police perspective, we have had detectives here from every one of our posts around Indiana. We have 14 of them. So over about 150 people within the ISP have touched this in some way or another.
In March 2017, the Investigation Command Center moved from the Delphi City Office Building to a larger space which could accommodate a large number of law enforcement personnel for an extended period of time. On any given day in these first weeks of the investigation, there were approximately 20 FBI agents and 30 other law enforcement officers staffing the case 20 hours a day. The FBI took over handling the tip lines, which were inundated with calls and emails, in the last week of February, and moved the call center to Washington, although they continued to funnel tips considered important to investigators on the ground in Delphi via satellite trucks stationed outside the local command center. By February 23rd, just 10 days after the murders, they had processed 3,900 tips. 1,900 of these came in after the audio clip of the suspect saying "down the hill" was released. By the end of April, there had been 16,000 tips reported to the email and phone tip lines, and the Indiana State Police had investigated over 500 persons as a result of those tips. In addition to taking in the tips and running them down to determine their credibility and importance, the FBI also created seeking information posters about the case, laying out the basic facts and containing a description of the suspect and the photo of him on the bridge, as well as pictures of the girls. These flyers were distributed nationally. In an effort to increase awareness of the case and generate tips, the FBI also launched a nationwide digital billboard campaign establishing 6,000 billboards in 46 states. The billboards broadcast images of the suspect and of Abby and Libby and contained basic information about the case as well as the tip line number. Interestingly, the billboards stated that the man in the photo was last seen at 2:30 p.m. on February 13, 2017. Of course, we cannot detail every aspect of the investigation undertaken by these 25 agencies here, but we will address some specific things that were done in the hunt for Abby and Libby's killer in the months after their deaths. In connection with this podcast, we spoke at length with Paul Holes, the renowned former detective and DNA expert whose work helped bring the alleged Golden State Killer, Joseph DeAngelo, to justice. Here is Paul Holes describing a typical investigation.
Well, anytime I have a case in which it's likely that there is no known relationship between the victim and the offender, I'm looking for that physical evidence that could actually identify the offender. And that really is limited to two forms of physical evidence in terms of the forensic sense, and that's DNA and fingerprints. And so now it's really looking at what is present within the crime scene, whether it be at the crime scene, objects in the crime scene, evidence collected from the victim's clothing or the victim's bodies that might be able to give me that critical DNA evidence or that critical fingerprint evidence to give me a name. That is so important. And so that's where the focus in these types of cases has to be.
Crime scene experts and forensic technicians spent 2 weeks poring over the area surrounding the Delphi crime scene, collecting and preserving evidentiary items and looking for more clues such as footprints, fingerprints, hairs, fibers, and so on. Searchers found Libby's Nike sneaker on the bridge side of Deer Creek, and we heard on the police scanner audio that there were also pieces of clothing and a cigarette butt found under the bridge that may be related to the case.
Fire 15, squad 2. Send it. Found an item of interest under the railroad bridge.
Copy that. Go ahead and describe it to me.
Girl's undergarments.
Good copy, thank you. Stand by.
These items were found in or near the water, perhaps having washed down from the area of the creek near where the bodies were found, or perhaps the killer discarded them in the water in an attempt to destroy evidence. In fact, we don't even know whether the underwear and cigarette belonged to the girls or the suspect at all, or whether they were unrelated to the case. But presumably, these items and any others retrieved were gathered and carefully preserved for examination by forensic analysts. We can only assume that the girls' bodies, which were found within sight of each other, were carefully removed, processed, and swabbed for any possible evidence. Toxicology tests were performed on the victims. Again, we do not know the results. Authorities have never discussed the condition of the bodies, whether they were clothed, the manner of death, or whether there was any sexual assault. Within hours of the girls being located, the Indiana State Police began stopping cars driving in the area, asking drivers if they'd seen anything suspicious or unusual. According to Sergeant Jerry Holman of the Indiana State Police, the lead investigator for that agency, officers spoke to as many as 600 people in this canvass. The scope of the inquiry was vast. Sergeant Kim Riley said that they were, quote, trying to get people that were driving down the Hoosier heartland, that were on the interstate, that were in Logansport, that might have saw somebody walking, hitchhiking, if they saw a duffel bag laying somewhere, anything. We're just reaching out for people that saw anything within that distance. Investigators tracked down people who were on the Monon High Bridge Trail that day interviewing them for information. Officers went door to door to the residences near the bridge and the High Bridge Trail area to determine whether homeowners had seen anything on the 13th. Local registered sex offenders, of which there were 12 living in Delphi as of 2019, and many more in the surrounding counties, were rounded up, questioned regarding their alibis, and, in some cases, polygraphed. More than 20 people contacted by law enforcement in connection with the murder investigation ended up being arrested on unrelated charges. Authorities found that they were engaged in criminal activity, drugs, outstanding warrants, or parole violations, although not in any way connected to Libby and Abby. Authorities also researched similar double murders across the country to determine whether they could be connected. And, of course, all friends, relatives, and acquaintances of Abby and Libby and their extended families were interviewed and processed. Some were even given lie detector tests. Kelsi has said that she was interviewed by police and FBI multiple times, as she was the last known person to see the girls. On the technological side of things, Abby and Libby's social media accounts, including Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, and any other platforms used by either of the girls, were accessed and analyzed, and any online contacts tracked down and interviewed. In short, the investigation was exhaustive, thorough, and painstaking, and continues to this day. Police executed approximately 70 subpoenas and 12 search warrants that we know of in the months following the crime. We have already addressed 3 of them, 2 at Ron Logan's property, on which the girls were found, and 1 on Bicycle Bridge Road, about 5 miles away. Another warrant was carried out at a home on Canal Street in Peru, Indiana, about 30 miles away on February 25th, but law enforcement has said that it has been determined that the residents of that home were in no way connected to the murders of Libby and Abby. We have no information regarding the remainder of the search warrants. They could be for property searches, but they could also be warrants to obtain video surveillance footage from cameras maintained by local businesses or residents, or warrants to obtain cell phone records, computers, or other technological information. Robert Ives told us that he personally submitted multiple subpoenas seeking to obtain all cell phone records within a 5-mile radius that day to determine who was in the area on the 13th. All owners of cell phones that pinged in the area of the bridge that day were contacted regarding their activities and whether they'd seen anything. Investigators looked particularly closely at anyone whose phone records showed that they were newly in the area or spent several hours there during the time in question. Law enforcement also tried to determine the suspect's manner of ingress and egress to and from the area. In other words, how did he come and go? We know that the suspect was on the High Bridge Trail, as we have photo evidence of him on the bridge. Did he leave the same way he came, by crossing the bridge? Law enforcement parameters given that day indicate that they believe the suspect left the area by 5 p.m. and was possibly still in the area when searchers had begun looking for the girls. He only had a few options once he had killed the girls as to where to go to avoid being seen, especially if his clothes were wet from the creek or displayed other evidence of his crimes. The 2 most likely options are he could have walked north through Ron Logan's property or the cemetery to County Road 300 North, or he could have walked west through the woods along the north bank of Deer Creek and rejoined the Monon High Bridge Trail before the beginning of the bridge, and then walked back to Delphi or somewhere else using the Freedom Bridge Trail. These routes are also close to the Hoosier Heartland Highway and Interstate 25, both major roads that could have provided a quick exit. It is unknown whether the suspect had a vehicle, and if he did, where it was parked. Authorities have spent countless hours investigating the vehicles parked at trailhead parking areas and other nearby locations that day. Many feel that the logical place for the suspect to leave his car is the cemetery abutting Ron Logan's property, which had small designated parking areas. This is in close proximity to where the girls were found and would have been a short, if somewhat treacherous, hike through the woods to the bridge. It has been reported that one witness, a woman who lived near Ron Logan, saw a man leaving the cemetery that day. Of course, whether or not the suspect stashed a vehicle to make a quick getaway depends on whether he arrived at the Monon High Bridge Trail with a plan to kill someone that day or even to kill these specific girls. This is all purely speculative. Unfortunately, if the suspect did leave a vehicle at the cemetery, it is likely that evidence of the vehicle was destroyed by the large numbers of law enforcement vehicles that parked there on February 14th. Let's discuss the evidence as we understood it in the months after the murder. Much information has been kept under seal by law enforcement in anticipation that it might be needed at trial, but of course, we have the officially released video still images and the audio. Both of these were obtained from Libby's phone and were in fact from the same video. Libby's iPhone 6 was, as for many teens, a lifeline for her. She was active on social media with accounts on Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. These accounts were followed by her family, and she was friends with her sister Kelsi and grandparents on all of them. Kelsi explains.
We had to be friends with them on it so they could see what we were posting. And I'm sure that they checked our messages without us knowing because they had our passwords.
Libby used her phone to communicate with family and friends, but also for fun things like making videos and listening to the music she loved. Libby's phone service provider was AT&T. She had recently been having problems with the phone freezing up and glitching, which often occurs when there is too much clutter on a device's memory, and about 10 days before the murders, had reset her phone with the help of her Aunt Tara. This is why Becky had been unable to run a Find My iPhone trace on Libby's phone during the search. The factory reset deleted the items on the phone, and many of them had not yet been downloaded and reinstalled from the cloud. We will return to our story after a brief message from our sponsors. Libby's phone was recovered at the scene. We do not have information as to where exactly the phone was located, whether on Libby's person or somewhere in the vicinity, but we know that law enforcement found it and that it was in the general area of where the bodies were found. And as we discussed in the last episode, Libby was miraculously able to record a video on her phone that captured the man approaching the girls on the bridge, providing us with the still images of the suspect released by law enforcement. The video was recorded using the iPhone's standard camera app on the video setting. The audio clip saying "down the hill" was extracted from this video. Law enforcement has confirmed that there is more of both audio and video footage on Libby's phone. The audio file accompanied the video. In other words, all the audio police have is the auditory portion of the video. We cannot be certain what provoked Libby to begin recording the man on the bridge, or if, in fact, he was even on the bridge when she began videoing. Police have never released the time that the video commenced, or discussed what sequence of events that might be on the video, when it started and what was happening, and when it stopped and what was happening. Law enforcement has even refused to indicate how much video and audio footage exist on the phone in terms of duration. So all we know is that at some point, Libby began recording on her phone and captured the suspect in the footage. On an iPhone like Libby's, a video recording in progress will be interrupted by an incoming call, such as the call we know was made to her phone by Derek at 3:11 p.m. Upon receiving the call, the video would stop recording and the existing video would be saved, but the recording would not resume on its own. we don't know that this is what happened. Libby's phone could have continued to record until the battery died if a call did not come in during recording. We have to wonder, though, if a call did come in, whether Libby's ringer was on, alerting the suspect to the presence of her phone. If the suspect knew that Libby had a phone and chose not to take it with him, it shows a level of sophistication and self-control regarding his knowledge of the traceability of the device and that it would lead police to him. Or perhaps he attempted to destroy the phone and underestimated the ability of law enforcement techs to retrieve electronic information. So all the public really knows from the video is that it shows the suspect walking on the bridge toward the girls. Mike has stated that he believes that Libby, trained by him to be wary, was uneasy about the man approaching them and would have recorded him in order to show the family later. Sergeant Jerry Holman also indicated that he believes both girls were uncomfortable about the man's presence. It's possible that they had encountered him earlier on the trail, but it's also possible that he was approaching them rapidly across the bridge, and something about his movements was unsettling. Remember, we said that Libby was a fan of detective and forensic investigative shows and was taught to be aware of her environment. But for some reason, Libby chose not to use her phone to call 911, instead opting to film the suspect. It's likely that the suspect was upon the girls before Libby had time to react and call for help. Because police stated at the press conference on February 15th that the man in the video still images is the killer, we know that something that police learned from that video confirmed that he is the murderer of Libby and Abby. But Carroll County Sheriff Tobe Lesenby has stated that the crime itself was not recorded, so we can only guess at what that might be. Based on the video still images released by the police of the suspect, we can determine that he was on the bridge walking toward the southeast end when the video was shot. In fact, we can determine his location on the bridge quite accurately. The Monon High Bridge was constructed with 6 small wooden platforms sticking off its sides in staggered locations along the bridge's span. These platforms are large enough for 2 people to stand on. Based on the placement of the suspect relative to both the forked tree visible behind him, which is approximately 280 feet from the end of the bridge, and to Platform 5, visible closer behind him, which is approximately 220 feet from the end of the bridge, we can determine that he was approximately 60 feet away from the end of the bridge when this portion of the video was shot. The lack of resolution on the video still images tells us that Libby was quite far from the suspect when she was filming this segment. As Robert Ives stated,
the image of the suspect is an image from a video from a cell phone camera at great distance.
It is believed that Libby was very likely standing just off the end of the bridge with Abby approaching her, and both were aware of the suspect drawing closer to them and knowing that because they were at a dead end, they would soon have a close encounter with him. We can also determine from the positioning of shadows visible in the video still images that it was sometime in the mid-afternoon. Because law enforcement released these images, asking for the public's help in identifying the suspect, we can be assured that these are the best possible images of the suspect available on the video, meaning that this was the closest he got before Libby either stopped recording or placed the phone, still in record mode, somewhere hidden on her person, and it continued to record audio without usable video. Becky, Mike, and Anna were permitted to watch the video and listen to the audio. Anna has stated that she could continue to hear audio even after she could no longer see anything. And the audio portion released by law enforcement, Down the Hill, seems to be somewhat muffled, as if perhaps the microphone was covered or blocked in some way. As for the images, Anna has also stated that the images of the man are absolutely the best that can be obtained from the video. even after they were enhanced by experts at NASA and Disney. And Robert Ives confirmed for us that the images have been enhanced as much as possible.
People kept asking, well, why don't they enhance that picture? Why don't they make that picture? Well, there's no pixels to enhance. There just aren't very many pixels there. And so they did a marvelous job, really, of getting that picture up to the quality it is. And I know that's confused people out in the public. Well, why don't? Because there's no magic, as you know. I mean, you have X number of pixels. Those pixels are a certain color. It may be that you can enhance the image by adding to the contrast or reducing the contrast, but you can't do anything to change the fact you have X number of pixels making up the picture. And as such, you only have certain resolution when you're dealing with a picture like that.
Unfortunately, the suspect's image was captured while he was looking down, making his face almost impossible to see clearly. It is believed that Libby filmed the killer surreptitiously by holding her phone down by her hip while recording. Abby may have been still on the bridge, approaching the end where Libby was, but she has been cropped out of the still image as it is zoomed in. And the suspect was walking toward them, his hands in his pockets. Perhaps he was attempting to look casual, like any normal hiker on the trails, strolling along with no agenda. Perhaps he was looking down because he was watching his footing on the treacherous bridge trestles. Or perhaps he was deliberately hiding his face from the girls, and his hands were in his pockets, gripping something that would shortly be used to end their lives. Many observers of the video still images released by law enforcement showing the suspect in his blue jacket and baggy jeans believe that visible under the jacket are bulky items that could be weapons or objects from a kill kit. Next, the audio. We have heard the suspect command "down the hill" in the audio clip released by police at the press conference in February 2017. When we consider where Abby and Libby almost certainly encountered him, at the dead end of the Monon High Bridge, and where they ended up, across Deer Creek to the north of the bridge's end, we can piece together what occurred after the suspect confronted and contained the girls. Members of the Indiana State Police have stated to the media that in part of the audio not released to the public, Abby and Libby can be heard engaging in typical girl talk, but also discussing the man that they saw behind them. The family has informed us that in addition, the girls can be heard whispering between themselves and wondering where they were possibly going to go. Anna told an interviewer that Libby said something like, "Well, the path ends here, so we can't go any farther." So what happened once the suspect caught up with Libby and Abby trapped at the end of the Monon High Bridge? It is not believed that they walked back across the bridge. Approximately 30 feet straight ahead from the southeast end of the bridge, amid the woods, is a red metal barrier similar to the one at the westerly end of the bridge. Without leaves on the trees, as there would have been none in February, the girls and the suspect would have been able to see farm fields and farm outbuildings past the red barricade, through the trees straight ahead, and a smaller red house or farmhouse through the trees on the right-hand side. To avoid these settled areas and fields where they would be visible, the girls and the suspect instead navigated the steep hill down to the left at the bridge's end. There, they would have crossed the private dirt driveway that connected the remote homes and farmhouses in the area to the road in town to the south. This driveway, if followed away from County Road 300 North, wound through wooded areas and eventually turned into a road, ironically, the same road where Abby and her mother lived about a mile away. But the group did not take this driveway route. They continued across the driveway to the left of the bridge, and from there, another steep descent took the group down toward Deer Creek. Members of law enforcement have publicly acknowledged what Kelsi told us, that the girls were found across Deer Creek from the bridge, about a half-mile from where Kelsi originally dropped them off. Their bodies lay about 170 yards from the end of the bridge, and 50 feet from the north bank of the creek. The name Deer Creek is somewhat of a misnomer. This waterway is not a bubbling brook or stream running over mossy rocks and sticks. Deer Creek much more resembles a river. In certain areas, it is as deep as a river. Recall that we said that Anna had taken Abby there to swim on a few occasions. It is deep enough that dive teams and special underwater equipment were brought in after the killings to search the depths of the creek's murky water. If anything was found, it has never been released by law enforcement. While many areas of Deer Creek are too deep for people to traverse comfortably, there is an area near a bend in the creek to the northeast of the bridge that has a sandbar and is shallow enough to cross. It is here that many believe the girls and the suspect crossed over to Ron Logan's wooded property on the other side, where the girls were likely killed and where they were found. Ron Logan has said that the path the girls and the suspect took from the bridge to where the girls were found is very difficult to navigate, with rocky, steep terrain, a deep ravine, and woods and thickets. Remember that Kelsi told us that the girls were found in a valley of sorts. It was unthinkable to the 77-year-old landowner that the girls would undertake to walk in this area voluntarily. Someone either forced them to go there, or they were running away from someone and were overtaken there. The latter scenario makes some sense because, as Robert Ives told us, while the area where the girls died is wooded and off the beaten path, it is by no means completely isolated. In fact, one home atop the ridge, to the northeast of the end of the bridge, has an unobstructed view of the spot where the girls' bodies were found. Kelsi seems to believe that the girls tried to escape by running through the creek.
She probably ran through the water and it fell off.
If you recall, authorities have never officially confirmed the time frame of the killings. What we know, we have had to extrapolate for ourselves from the little that law enforcement has released. Libby's Snapchat photo of Abby on the bridge was taken and posted at approximately 2:07 p.m. By 3:11 p.m., when Derek called Libby, she was not answering her phone. Sometime in that hour is when the girls were beset by their killer. We can narrow this down a little further. The video still images of the suspect were almost certainly captured between 2:20 and 2:30 p.m. We can determine this using the Sunlight and Daylight system in 3D Studio Max, a high-end 3D application which calculates time based on light, shadows, time of year, and geographical location. So if the killer was on the bridge at 2:30 and Libby failed to answer her phone at 3:11 p.m., we now have an approximately 40-minute window when the crime occurred. We do not know how quickly everything went down, how long the girls were alive, or what was done to them. The family has told us that they received confirmation that the girls were killed on the 13th and were no longer alive throughout the night as people searched for them. We can assume that Abby and Libby were killed shortly after they were abducted, simply because family searchers started combing the area by 4 o'clock and official searches began around 5:30. And other people were on the bridge that day after the girls and saw nothing unusual. In what must have been a very near miss, a woman named Cheyenne was on the Monon High Bridge that day around 3 p.m. She said that as she stood on the bridge taking pictures, she didn't see or hear anything out of the ordinary. The text accompanying her Facebook post read, "I even walked all the way across the bridge and back. I only saw a guy when I first got there and another couple once I got on the bridge. I didn't see the girls at all." She posted a photo of the bridge to social media at 3:49 p.m. By this time, it is believed that the girls were dead. Despite the fact that it seems unbelievably brazen of the suspect to have abducted the girls at the bridge's end and killed them in a relatively public place, all in broad daylight, there is no evidence that the girls were taken to another private location before they were killed on Ron Logan's property. Robert Ives confirmed for us that law enforcement believes that the girls were killed where they were found. As stated by Kelsi, Libby's phone pinged on both towers in the town of Delphi that day, but the town is so small that this is entirely to be expected just through normal usage. There is no evidence that Libby's phone moved around town at all after the Snapchat photo was posted, and it was located at the scene. And as we have stated, it has been confirmed by family members that the girls were killed on the 13th, and law enforcement believes the suspect left the area well before dark that afternoon. In addition to the audio, the video still images, and the shoe found, there is one additional, potentially crucial piece of evidence that was found in this case. This type of evidence has been in the news a great deal lately because of its importance in solving violent crimes and murders with certainty, even after decades have passed. Of course, we are talking about DNA. Law enforcement has never come out and stated conclusively that they have a full profile of the DNA of the perpetrator, but they have confirmed that they do have DNA from the crime scene. Robert Ives told us that DNA was found that did not belong to the girls. As Sergeant Jerry Holman put it in the days after the killings, we are still working on identifying all of the DNA that we have there. Because we don't have the details about the crime, we do not know what exactly this DNA evidence entails. Semen, blood, skin cells, an object touched or used by the suspect, or something else. According to one expert, investigators might be able to obtain a good profile from just 30 to 35 human cells. On February 23rd, just 10 days after the girls were murdered, Sheriff Lesenby told the media that investigators had requested that DNA evidence be fast-tracked. Sheriff Lesenby later backtracked on this statement, saying that he hadn't intended to confirm or deny the presence of perpetrator DNA. But it is evident that investigators were able to obtain a DNA sample of unknown quality and quantity from the scene. Not only have investigators made veiled references to having DNA in various interviews, but many people were requested to give DNA samples in the days and weeks after the murders. For example, the families all gave DNA samples. Kelsi says she did so 3 times. Furthermore, Delphi residents and others that police spoke with during the course of the investigation were asked to give voluntary DNA samples. The state of Indiana also passed a law effective in 2018, partially in response to Libby and Abby's murders, that requires anyone arrested in the state for a felony to provide a DNA sample. So the DNA of anyone arrested in the area after January 1st, 2018 would be on file. But of course, this would only help if the man who killed the girls was arrested for something else after the beginning of 2018. The DNA found at the scene of Abby and Libby's murders and belonging to someone other than the girls was presumably run through CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, a national database cataloging the DNA of previous offenders. The fact that there have been no arrests in this case indicates that no hits were obtained. We will revisit the DNA issue in a subsequent episode. But at this point in time, approximately 4 months after the murders, it seemed unclear how helpful the DNA would prove to be, and the investigation continued. Initially, many people expected this case to be solved within a very short amount of time. After all, the police had video and audio of the suspect, and possibly even his DNA. It was a small town. How hard could it be? Authorities initially felt the same way.
I'm still stunned by it. To think that we had a crime scene, we had bodies within 24 hours of their death, that we had a video recording and an audio recording. I would have thought, and I promise you everybody else thought, we're never going to have this much evidence. I mean, and there's, as I say, there's more. that we have all these facts, some of them somewhat unusual, and there's going to be something about these facts that's going to point to somebody. I am shocked. I'm stunned. But when I say that, I don't mean that I think anybody failed. Many, many great police officers have worked their tails off on this. And it's just, they just aren't finding it. And there were promising leads at one time or another, amazing things, but they didn't lead to they didn't lead to a person that was even close to chargeable.
But days, weeks, and then months began to elapse without any resolution. Paul Holes commented to us on his feelings about the case dragging on.
As I was monitoring the headlines, as this case was becoming more and more prominent in the public domain, it just seemed to continue to remain unsolved. I was a little bit surprised, but I've seen that with other cases, and there's just so much that goes on behind the scenes with these types of cases, these types of investigations. It's hard to jump to a foregone conclusion. We're just going to solve this case, or they're just going to solve this case right out the gate.
It seems that the investigators themselves initially believed that the case would be wrapped up expediently. Here is Anna.
The detectives were like, this is not going to take that long. It's a small town. Somebody's going to say something, and this is all going to be over soon. I mean, the first couple of weeks, that's what it felt like, is that any day now, and then all of a sudden a couple of weeks turned into a couple of months.
Superintendent Doug Carter responds to Kelsi's question as to whether he was surprised that the audio and video failed to quickly expose the suspect.
I was, and even a little bit disappointed, probably.
Nevertheless, the hard-working investigators remained optimistic, beginning each day at the Case Command Center with a prayer and the motto, "Today is the day. Today's the day. Today is the day we are going to get closer to the end. Today is the day we are going to get closer to getting justice for Abby and Libby," said Indiana State Police Sergeant Jerry Holman to a reporter. "We have all worked tragic cases. Nothing like this. I can't put anything close to this case." Police continued to work 20 hours a day, running down tips and pursuing leads. Robert Ives and many others worked 7 days a week on the case in those early days. By March 13th, 1 month into the investigation, police had received 13,000 tips and had cleared more than 2,000 of these, and the reward fund for information leading to the killer was up to $224,000. At the end of the month, several of the investigators from other jurisdictions who had been assigned to the case on a temporary basis returned to their home bases as the investigation settled into a normalization process, continuing to investigate the double homicide at a less frantic pace. And while Superintendent Doug Carter of the Indiana State Police stated that investigators had identified several people of interest, time continued to tick by, and the possibility that this crime could fall into the category of the hardest to solve, random crimes of opportunity committed by a stranger, was beginning to become more and more real. The fact was, police did not have any known suspects. But that would all change very soon. We will continue with Scene of the Crime, Delphi, in our next episode. If you have any information about Libby and Abby, please call the tip line at 1-844-459-5786. Scene of the Crime is narrated by me, Natalie Gray. Research and writing by Jessica Bettencourt. Technical advisor Gray Hughes. Consulting producer Kelsi German. Producers Gray Hughes, Jessica Bettencourt, and Mike Morford. Executive producer Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Special thanks to the families of Liberty German and Abigail Williams, Kelsi German, Mike Patty, Becky Patty, and Anna Williams. Thanks also goes out to Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter, Robert Ives, Paul Holes, Dr. Katherine M. Brown, Colleen Fitzpatrick, Drew Collins, Michael Bennett, and Bree Wilber. If you'd like to help this podcast reach new listeners, be sure to subscribe to it and leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please recommend Scene of the Crime to your friends. You can find Scene of the Crime on Twitter with the handle @SceneOfCrimePod.